The Adventure of the Noble Bachelor. The Lord St. Simon marriage and its curious termination have long ceased to be the subject of interest in those exalted circles in which the unfortunate bridegroom moves. Fresh scandals have eclipsed it, and their more piquant details have drawn the gossips away from this 4-year-old drama. As I have reason to believe, however, that the full facts have never been revealed to the general public, and as my friend Sherlock Holmes had a considerable share in clearing the matter up, I feel that no memoir of him would be complete without some little sketch of this remarkable episode. It was a few weeks before my own marriage, during the days which I was still sharing rooms with Holmes in Baker Street, that he came home from an afternoon stroll to find a letter on the table waiting for him. I had remained indoors all day, for the weather had taken a sudden turn to rain, with the high autumnal winds, and the Jezebel bullet which I brought back in one of my limbs, as a relic of my Afghan campaign, throbbed with a dull persistency. With my body in one easy chair, and my legs upon the other, I surrounded myself with a cloud of newspapers until at last, saturated with the news of the day, I tossed them all aside and lay listless, watching the huge crest and monogram upon the envelope before the table, and wondering lazily who my friend's noble correspondent could be. "Here's a very fashionable epistle," I remarked as he entered. "Your morning letters, if I remember right, were from a fishmonger and a tide waiter." "Yes, my correspondence is certainly the charm of variety," he answered, smiling. "And the humbler are usually more interesting. This one looks like one of those unwelcome social summonses which call upon a man either to be bored or to lie." He broke the seal and glanced over the contents. "Oh, come, it may prove to be something of interest, after all." "Not social, then?" "No, distinctly professional." "And from a noble client?" "Of the highest in England." "My dear fellow, I congratulate you." "I assure you, Watson, without affection, that the state of my client in this matter is of less moment to me than the interest of this cause. It is just possible, however, that may also be wanting in this new investigation. You have been reading the papers diligently of late, have you not?" "It looks like it," I said ruefully, pointing to the huge bundle in the corner. "I have had nothing else to do." "It is fortunate for you that you will perhaps be post me up. I read nothing except the criminal news in the agony column. The latter is always instructive, but if you have followed recent events so closely, you must have read about Lord St. Simon and his wedding." "Oh, yes, with the deepest interest." "That is well. The letter which I hold in my hand is from Lord St. Simon. I will read it to you, and in return you must turn over those papers and let me have whatever bears upon the matter. This is what he says. My dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Lord Blackwater tells me that I may place implicit reliance upon your judgment and discretion. I have determined, therefore, to call upon you, and to consult you in the reference of a very painful event which has occurred in connection to my wedding. Mr. Lestrade, of Scotland Yard, is acting already in the matter, but he assures me that he sees no objection to your cooperation, and that he even thinks that it might be of some assistance. I will call at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and should you have any other engagements at the time, I shall hope that you will postpone it, as this is a matter of paramount importance. Yours faithfully, St. Simon." Hey, Fred. It is dated from Gersner Mansions, written with a quill pen, and the noble lord has had the misfortune to get a smear of ink upon the outer side of his right little finger, remarked Holmes, as he folded up the pistol. It says 4 o'clock. It is 3 now. You will be here in an hour. Then I have just time, with your assistance, to get clear on the subject. Turn over those papers and arrange the extracts in the order of time, while I take a glance at who our client is. He picked a red-covered letter volume from the line of books of reference upon the mantelpiece. Here he is, he said, sitting down and flattening it upon the knee. Lord Robert Walsingham de Vere St. Simon, second son of the Duke of Balmoral. Arms, azure, 3 calips, and chief over fresh stables. Born in 1846, he is 41 years of age, which is mature for a marriage. Was Undersecretary for the Colonies in the late administration. The Duke, his father, was at one time Secretary of Foreign Affairs. They inherit Plantagenet blood by direct descent and Tudor on the distaff side. Ha! Well, there's nothing very instructive here of all this. I think I must turn to you, Watson, for something more solid. Ancient. I have very little difficulty in finding what I want, said I, for the facts are quite recent, and the matter struck me as remarkable. I feared to refer you to them, however, as I knew that you had an injury on your hand, and you disliked the intrusion of the matters. Oh, you mean the little problem of Grosvenor Square furniture van? That is quite cleared up now, although, indeed, it wasn't obvious from the first. Pray give me the results of your newspaper selections. 3 years old. Here's the first notice which I can find. It is in the personal column of the Morning Post, and dates, as you see, some weeks back. I can't get over 30 being old. A marriage has been arranged, it says, and will, if rumour is correct, very shortly take place between Lord Robert St. Simon, second son of the Duke of Balmoral, to Miss Hattie Doran, the only daughter of Ulysses Doran, Esquire, of San Francisco, California, USA. That is all. Terse and to the point, remarked Holmes, stretching his long, thin legs towards the fire. There was a paragraph amplifying this one on the society papers of the same week. Ah, here it is. There will soon be a call for protection in the marriage market. For the present, free trade principle appears to tell heavily against our home product. One by one, the management of the noble houses of Great Britain is passing into the hands of our fair cousins from across the Atlantic. The important addition has been made during the last week in the list of the prizes which have been borne away by these charming invaders. Lord St. Simon, who has shown himself for even 20 years proof against this little god's arrows, has now definitely announced his approaching marriage to Miss Hattie Doran, the fascinating daughter of a California millionaire. Miss Doran, whose graceful figure and striking face attracted much attention at the Westbury House festivities, is an only child, and it is currently reported that her dowry will run considerably over the 6 figures, with expectancies for the future. As it is an open secret that the Duke of Balmoral has been compelled to sell his pictures within the last few years, and as Lord St. Simon has no property of his own save a small estate in Birchmoor, it is obvious that the Californian heiress is not only the gainer by an allowance, which will enrapture her to make her an easy and common transition from a Republican lady to a British peeress. Anything else? Asked Holmes, yawning. Oh, yes, plenty. Then there is another note in the Morning Post to say that the marriage would be an absolutely quiet one, that it would be at St. George, Hanover Square, and that only half a dozen intimate friends would be invited, and that the party would return to the furnished house at Lancaster Gate, which has been taken by Mr. Alonzo Storin. 2 days later, that is, on Wednesday night, there is a curt announcement that the wedding had taken place and that the honeymoon would be passed at Lord Blackwater's place near Pesterfield. Those are all the notices which appeared before the disappearance of the bride. Before the what? Asked Holmes with a start. The vanishing of the lady. When did she vanish, then? At the wedding breakfast. Indeed. This is more interesting than promised to me. Quite dramatic, in fact. Yes, it has struck me as being a little out of the common. They often vanish before the ceremony, and occasionally during the honeymoon, but I cannot call to mind anything that so prompt as this. Pray, let me have the details. I warn you, they are very incomplete. Perhaps we may make them less so. Such as they are set forth in a single article of the morning paper of yesterday, which I will read to you. It is headed, Singular Occurrence at a Fashionable Wedding. The family of Lord Robert St. Simon has been thrown into the greatest consternation by the strange and painful episodes which have taken place in connection with his wedding. The ceremony, as shortly announced in the papers of yesterday, occurred in the previous morning. But it is only now that it has been possible to confirm the strange rumors which have been made so persistently floating about. In spite of the attempts of the friends to hush the matter up, so much public attention has now been drawn to it that no good purpose can be served by affecting this to disregard what is a common subject of conversation. The ceremony, which was performed at St. George's, Hanover Square, was a very quiet one, no one being present save for the father of the bride, Mr. Alonzo Storin, the Duchess of Balmoral, Lord Blackwater, Lord Instance, and Lady Clara St. Simon, the younger brother and sister of the bridegroom, and Lady Alicia Wissington. The whole party proceeded afterwards to the house of Mr. Alonzo Storin at Lancaster Gate, where breakfast had been prepared. It appears that there was some little trouble caused by a woman, whose name has not been ascertained, who endeavoured to force her way into the house upon the bridal party, alleging that she had some claim upon Lord St. Simon. It was only after a painful and prolonged scene that she was ejected by the butler and the footman. The bride, who had fortunately entered the house before the unpleasant interruption, had sat down to breakfast with the rest, when she complained of a sudden indigestion and retired upon her room. Her prolonged absence having caused some comment, her father followed her, but learned from her maid that she had only come up to her chamber for an instant, caught up in an ulster and bonnet, and hurried down the passage. One of the footmen declared that he had seen the lady leave the house, thus impaled, but had refused to comment at his mistress, believing her to be with the company. On ascertaining that his daughter had disappeared, Mr. Alonzo Storin, in conjunction with the bridegroom, instantly put themselves in communication with the police, and very energetic inquiries were being made, which will probably result in a speedy clearing up of this very singular business. Up to the late hour last night, however, nothing had transpired as to the whereabouts of the missing lady. There are rumors of foul play in the matter, and it is said that the police have caused the arrest of a woman who had caused the original disturbance, and believe that, from jealousy or some other motive, she may have been concerned in the strange disappearance of the bride. Is that all? Only one little item in another of the morning papers, but a suggestive one. And it is? Miss Flora Miller, the lady who has caused the disturbance, was actually been arrested. It appears that she was formerly a dueña of the Allegro, and that she was known to the bridegroom for some years. There are no further peculiars, and the whole case is in your hands now, so far as it seems to set forth in the public press. An exceedingly interesting case, it appears to be. I would not be misled by the words. But there is a ring at the bell, Watson, and as the clock makes it a few minutes before 4, I have no doubt that this will prove to be our noble client. Do not dream of going, Watson, for I very much prefer having witnesses, if only as a check on our own memory.
Lord Robert St. Simon,
announced our page boy, throwing open the door. A gentleman entered with a pleasant, cultured face, high-nosed and pale, with something perhaps of petulance about the mouth, and with a steady, well-opened eye of a man whose present thought it had ever been to command or to be obeyed. The manner was brisk, and yet his general appearance gave an undue impression of age, for he had a slight forward stoop and a little bend at his knees as he walked. His hair, too, as he swept off the very curly-brimmed hat, was grizzled round the edges and thin upon the top. As to his dress, it was careful to the verge of foppishness, with a high collar, black frock coat, white waistcoat, yellow gloves, patent leather shoes, and light-coloured gaiters. He advanced slowly into the room, turning his head left to right, and swinging his right hand to the cord in which he held his golden glasses. "Good day, Lord St. Simon," said Holmes, rising and bowing. "Pray, take a basket chair. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. And draw up a little of the fire, and we will talk of this matter over." A most painful matter to me. You can most readily imagine, Mr. Holmes. I have been cut to the quick. I understand that you have already managed several delicate cases of this sort, sir, though I presume they are not hardly of the same class of society. No, I'm descending. I beg your pardon? My last client was the sort of a king. Oh, really? I had no idea. And which king? The king of Scandinavia. What? Had he lost his wife? You can understand, said Holmes suavely, that I extend to the affairs of my other clients the same secrecy which I promised to yours. Oh, of course. Right. I'm sure I beg your pardon. As to my own case, I'm ready to give you any information which may assist you in forming an opinion. Thank you. I've already learned all that is in the public prints, nothing more. I presume that I may take it correct this article, for example, that you happen to be the disappearance of a bride? Lord St. Simon glanced over it. Yes, that is correct as far as it goes. But it needs a great deal of supplementing before anyone could offer an opinion. I think that I may arrive to my facts most directly by questioning you. Pray do so. When did you first meet Miss Hattie Dorn? In San Francisco a few years ago. You were traveling in the States? Yes. Did you become engaged then? No. But you were on a friendly footing? I was amused by her society, and she could see that I was amused by it. Her father is very rich? He is said to be the richest man on the Pacific slope. And how did he make his money? In mining. He had nothing a few years ago, and then he struck gold, invested it, and came by leaps and bounds. Now, what is your own impression as to the young lady, your wife's character? The nobleman swung his glasses a little faster and stared down into the fire. You see, Mr. Holmes, said he, my wife was 20 before her father became a rich man. During that time, she ran free in a mining camp and wandered through the woods or mountains, so that her education was come from nature rather than the schoolmaster. She is what we call in England a tomboy, with a strong nature, wild and free, unfettered by any sort of traditions. She is impetuous, volcanic. I was about to say, she is swift in making up her mind and fearless in carrying out her resolutions. On the other hand, I would not have given her the name which I have the honor to bear. He gave a little stately cough. Had not I thought her to be at the bottom a noble woman. I believe that she is capable of heroic self-sacrifice, and that anything dishonorable would repugnate her. Real wild woman. Actual tomboy. Have you a photograph? I brought this with me. He opened the locket and showed us the full face of a very lovely woman. It was not a photograph, but an ivory miniature, and the artist had brought out the full effect of the lustrous black hair, large dark eyes, and exquisite mouth. Holmes gazed long and earnestly at it. Then he closed the locket and handed it back to the Lord St. Simon. The lady came back to London, and you renewed your acquaintance? Yes, her father brought her over for his last London season. I met her several times and engaged to her, and have now married her. She brought, I understand, a considerable dowry. A fair dowry, not more than is usual in my family. And this, of course, remains to you, since the marriage is a fait accompli. I really have made no inquiries on the subject. No, naturally not. Did you see Miss Doran on the day before the wedding? Yes. Was she in good spirits? Never met her. She kept talking of what we should do with our future lives. Indeed, that is very interesting. And on the morning of the wedding? She was as bright as possible, at least until after the ceremony. Did you observe any change in her then? Oh, to tell the truth, I saw the first signs that I'd ever seen that her temper was just a little sharp. The incident, however, was too trivial to relate and can have no possible bearing upon the case. Pray, let us have it, for all that. Oh, it's childish. She dropped the bouquet as we went towards the vestry. She was passing a pew at the time, and it fell over into a pew. Then there was a moment's delay, but the gentleman in the pew handed it up to her again, and it did not appear to be worse for the fall. Yet when I spoke to her of the matter, she answered me abruptly, and in the carriage on our way home she seemed absurdly agitated at the trifling cause. Indeed. You say that there was a gentleman in the pew. Some of the general public was present then? Oh, yes, it was impossible to exclude them from the churches open. This gentleman was not one of your wife's friends. Oh, no. I call him a gentleman by courtesy, but he was quite a common-looking person. I hardly noticed his appearance, but really, I think that we are wandering rather far from the point. Lady St. Simon, then, returned from the wedding in a less cheerful frame of mind than she had gone to it. What did she do on re-entering her father's house? I saw her in a conversation with her maid. And who is the maid? Alice is her name. She's an American and came from California with her. A confidential servant. A little too much so. It seemed to me that her mistress allowed her to take great liberties. So, of course, in America they look upon these things in a different way. How long did she speak to this Alice? Oh, a few minutes. I had something else to think of. You did not overhear what she said. Lady St. Simon said something about jumping a claim. She was accustomed to use a slang of this kind. I have no idea what she meant. American slang is very expressive sometimes. And what did your wife do when she finished speaking to her maid? She walked into the breakfast room. On your arm? No, alone. She is very independent in little matters like that. Then after we sat down for 10 minutes or so, she rose hurriedly, muttered some words of apology, and left the room. She never came back. But this maid, Alice, as I understand, deposes that she went to her room, covered her bride's dress with a long ulster, put on a bonnet, and went out? Quite so. She was afterwards seen walking into Hyde Park in the company of Flora Miller, a woman who's now in custody. and who has already made a disturbance at Mr. Doran's house that morning. Ah, yes. I should like a few particulars to this young lady and your relations to her. Lord Simon shrugged his shoulders and raised his eyebrows. We've been on a friendly footing for some years. I may say on very friendly footing. She used to be at the Allegro, and I have treated her not ungenerously. And she has no just cause to complain against me, but you know what women are, Mr. Holmes. Flora was a dear little thing, and exceedingly high-headed, but devotedly attached to me. She wrote me dreadful letters when she heard that I was about to be married, and to tell the truth, the reason why I had the marriage celebrated so quietly was that I feared lest there might be a scandal with the church. She came to Mr. Doran's door just as after we had returned, and she endeavored to push her way in, utterly very abusive expressions towards my wife, and even threatening her. But I had foreseen the possibility of something of the sort, and I had 2 policemen follow her their private clothes, who soon pushed her out again. She was quiet when she saw that there was no good in making a row. Did your wife hear all this? No, thank goodness she did not. And she was seen walking with this very woman afterwards? Yes, that's what Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard looks upon so seriously. This was before that decoyed my wife out and laid some terrible trap for her. Well, it is a possible supposition. You think so too? I did not say a probable one, but you did not yourself look upon this as likely. I do not think Flora would hurt a fly. He doesn't know women. Still, jealousy is a strange transformer of characters. Pray, what is your own theory as to what took place? Oh, really, I came to seek a theory, not to propound one. I've given you all the facts since you asked me. However, I may say that it has occurred to me as possible that the excitement of this affair, the consciousness that she has made so immense a social stride, and the effect of causing some little nervous disturbance in my wife. In short, that she had become suddenly deranged. Well, really, when I consider that she has turned her back, I will not say upon me, but upon so much that may have aspired without recent success, I can hardly explain it in any other fashion. Well, certainly that is also a conceivable hypothesis, said Holmes, smiling. And now, Lord St. Simon, I think that I have nearly all my data. May I ask whether you are seated at the bedside table so that you can see out the window? We can see the other side of the road at the park. Quite so. Then I do not think that I need to detain you longer. I shall communicate with you. Should you be fortunate enough to solve the problem, said our client, rising. Oh, I have solved it. Eh? What was that? I say that I have solved it. Where, then, is my wife? That is a detail which I shall speedily supply. Lord St. Simon shook his head. I'm afraid that it will take wiser heads than yours or mine, he remarked. And bowing in a stately, old-fashioned manner, he departed. It is very good of Lord St. Simon to honor our head by putting it on a level with his own, said Sherlock Holmes, laughing. I think that I shall have a whiskey and soda and a cigar after this cross-questioning. I have formed my conclusions as to this case before our client came into the room. My dear Holmes, I have notes of several similar cases, though none, as I remarked before, were quite as prompt. My whole examination served to turn the conjecture into a certainty. Circumstantial evidence is occasionally very convincing, as when you find a trout in the milk, to quote Thoreau's example. But I have heard all that you have heard. without, however, the knowledge of pre-existing cases which serves me so well. There is a parallel instance in Aberdeen some years back, and something on very much the same lines as Munich the year after the Franco-Persian War. It was like one of these cases, but hello, there's Lestrade. Good afternoon, Lestrade. You will find an extra tumbler on the sideboard, and there are cigars in the box. The official detective was attired in a pea jacket and cravat, which gave him a decidedly nautical appearance, and he carried a black canvas bag in his hand. With a short greeting, he seated himself and lit the cigar which had been offered to him. "What's up, then?" asked Holmes with a twinkle in his eye. "You look dissatisfied." "I feel dissatisfied. It's this infernal St. Simon marriage case. I can make neither head nor tail of the business." "Really, you surprise me." "Who ever heard of such a mixed affair? Every clue seems to slip through my fingers, and I've been at work upon it all day." "And very wet it seems to have made you," said Holmes, laying his hand upon the arm of Peacock. "Yes, I've been dragging the Serpentine." "For heaven's name, what for?" "In search of the body of Lady St. Simon." Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his chair and laughed heartily. "Have you dragged the basin of Trafalgar Square and Mountain?" he said. "Why, what do you mean?" "Because you have just as good a chance of finding the lady there as in one or the other." Lestrade shot an angry glance at my companion. "I suppose you know all about it, then?" he snarled. "Well, I have only just heard the facts, but my mind is made up." "Oh, indeed. Then you think that the Serpentine plays no part in the matter?" "I think it very unlikely." "Then perhaps you will kindly explain how it is that we found this, then." He opened his bag as he spoke, and out tumbled to the floor a wedding dress of watered silk, a pair of white satin shoes, and a bride's wreath and veil, all discolored and soaked in water. "There," he said, putting a new wedding ring upon the top of the pile. "There's a little nut for you to crack, Mr. Holmes." "Oh, indeed," said my friend, blowing blue rings into the air. "You dragged them from the Serpentine?" "No, we found them floating near the margin of the park keeper. They have been identified as her clothes, and it seemed to me that if the clothes were there, then the body would not be far off." "By the same brilliant reasoning, every man's body is to be found in the neighborhood of his wardrobe. And pray, did you hope to arrive at this, though?" "Some evidence implicating Flora Miller in the disappearance." "I'm afraid that you will find it difficult." "Are you indeed, now?" cried Lestrade with some bitterness. "I'm afraid, Holmes, that you are not very practical with your deductions and your inferences. You have made 2 blunders in as many minutes. This dress does implicate Miss Flora Miller." "And how?" "And the dress is a pocket, and the pocket is a card case, and in the card case is a note, and here's the very note." He slapped it down upon the table in front of him. "Listen to this. You will see me when all is ready. Come at once. F.H.M." Now, my theory all along has been that Lady St. Simon was decoyed away by Miss Flora Miller, and that she, with confederates, no doubt, was responsible for the disappearance. Here, signed with her own initials, is the very note which was no doubt slipped into the hand at the door which lured her within the reach. "Very good, Lestrade," Holmes said, laughing. "You really are very fine indeed. Let me see it." He took up the paper in a listless way, but his attention instantly became riveted, and he gave a little cry of satisfaction. "This is indeed important," he said. "Ha! You find it so?" "Extremely so. I congratulate you warmly." Strad rose in his triumph and bent his head to look. "Why?" he shrieked. "You're looking at the wrong side." "On the contrary, this is the right side."
"Right side? You're mad. Here's a note with pencil written on it."
"And over here is what happens to be the fragment of a hotel bill which interests me deeply."
"There's nothing in it. I looked at it before," said Lestrade.
"October 4th, rooms 8S, 8 shillings, breakfast 2 shillings, $6. Cocktail 1 shilling, lunch 2 shillings, $6. Glass sherry, $8.
"I see nothing in that."
"Very likely not. It is most important all the same. As to the note, it is also important, or so the initials are. So I congratulate you again."
"I've wasted enough time," Lestrade said, rising. "I believe hard work is not sitting in the fire spinning fine theories. Good day, Mr. Holmes, and we shall see which gets to the bottom of the matter first."
He gathered up the garments and thrust them into the bag and made for the door. "Just one hint to you, Lestrade," drawled Holmes before his rival vanished. "I will tell you the true solution of the matter. Lady St. Simon is a myth. There is not, and there never has been, any such person." Lestrade sadly looked at my companion. Then he turned to me, tapped his forehead 3 times, shook his head solemnly, and hurried away. It hardly shut the door behind him when Holmes put on his overcoat. "There's something in what the fellow says about outdoor work," he remarked. "So I think, Watson, that I must leave you to your papers for a little." It was after 5 o'clock when Sherlock Holmes left me. But I had no time to be lonely, for within an hour there arrived a confectioner's man with a very large fat box. This he unpacked with the help of the youth whom had brought it with him, and presently, to the very great astonishment, a little Epicurean cold supper began to be laid out on the humble lodging-house mahogany. There were a couple of brace of cold woodcock, a pheasant, a pâté de foie gras, and a group of ancient and cobwebby bottles. Having laid all these out, the luxuries, the 2 visitors vanished away, like the genii of an Arabian Nights, with no explanations, save that things had been paid for and were ordered to this address. Just before 9 o'clock, Sherlock Holmes stepped briskly into the room. His features were gravely set, but there was a light in his eye which made me think that he had not been disappointed in his conclusions. "I have laid supper, then," he said, rubbing his hands. "You seem to expect company. They have laid out for 5. "Yes, I fancy we shall have some company dropping in." "I'm surprised that Lord St. Simon has not already arrived. Ha! I fancy that I hear steps now upon the stairs." It was indeed our visitor from the morning who came bustling in, dangling his glasses more vigorously than ever, and with him a very perturbed expression upon his aristocratic features. "My messenger reached you, then?" said Holmes. "Yes, and I confess that the contents startled me beyond measure. Have you good authority for what you say?" "The best possible." Lord St. Simon sank into a chair and passed his hand over his forehead. "What will the Duke say," he murmured, "when he hears that one of the family has been subjected to such humiliation?" "It is the purest accident. I cannot allow that there is any humiliation." "Ah, you look like on these things with another understanding point." I failed to see that anyone is to blame. I hardly see how the lady could have acted otherwise, and though her abrupt method of doing so was undoubtedly to be regretted. Having no mother, she had no one to advise her at such crisis. "It was a slight, sir, a public slight," said Lord Simon, tapping his fingers on the table. "You must make allowance for this poor girl, placed in so unprecedented tension." "I'll make no allowance of it. I am very angry indeed, and I have been shamefully used." I think I heard a bell, said Holmes. There are steps on the landing. If I cannot persuade you to take the lenient view of the matter, Lord St. Simon, I have brought an advocate here who may be more successful. He opened the door and ushered a lady and a gentleman. Lord St. Simon, said he, allow me to introduce to you Mr. and Mrs. Francis Hay Moulton. The lady, I think, you have already met. At the sight of the newcomers, our client had sprung from his seat and stood very erect, with his eyes cast down and his hand thrust into the breast of his frock coat, a picture of offended dignity. The lady had taken a quick step forward and had held out her hand to him, but he still refused to raise his eyes. It was as well for his resolution, perhaps, for her pleading face was one which it was hard to resist. "You're angry, Robert," said she. "Oh, I guess you have every cause to be." "Make no apology to me," said Lord St. Simon bitterly. "Oh, yes, I know that I should have treated you real bad, and that I should have spoken to you before I went, but I was kind of rattled, and from the time that I saw Frank here again, I didn't know what I was doing or saying. I wonder why I didn't fall down and faint right there before the altar." "Perhaps, Miss Moulton, you would like my friend and me to leave the room while you explain the matter?" "If I may give an opinion," remarked the strange gentleman, "we've just had a little bit too much secrecy over the business already. For my part, I would like all Europe and America to bear the rights of it." He was a small, wiry, sunburnt, clean-shaven, and a sharp face, and alert manner. "And then I'll tell our story right away," said the lady. "Frank here and I met in '84 in McGuire's camp near the Rockies, where Pa was working a claim. We were engaged to each other, Frank and I, but then one day Father struck a rich pocket and made a pile. Well, poor Frank here had a claim that petered out and came to nothing. The richer Pa grew, the poorer was Frank, so at last Pa wouldn't hear of our engagement lasting any longer, and he took me away to Frisco. Frank wouldn't throw up his hand, though, and he followed me there, and he saw me without Pa knowing anything about it. Would only have made him mad to know, so we just fixed it all up to ourselves. Frank said that he would go and make his pile too, and never come back to claim me until he had as much as Pa. So then I promised to wait for him till the end of time and pledged myself not to marry anyone else while he lived. Why shouldn't we be married right away, he said, and then I will feel sure of you, and I won't claim to be your husband until I come back. Well, we talked it over, and he fixed it all up so nicely, with the clergyman all ready and waiting, so we just did it right there. Then Frank went off to seek his fortune, and I went back to Pa. The next I heard of Frank was that he was in Montana, that he went prospecting in Arizona, and then I heard of him in New Mexico. After that came a long newspaper story about how a miners' camp had been attacked by Apache Indians, and there was my Frank's name among the killed. I fainted dead away, and I was very sick for months after. Pa thought I had the decline and took me half to the doctors of Frisco. Not a word of news came for a year or more, so that I never doubted that Frank was really dead. Then Lord St. Simon came to Frisco, and we came to London, and a marriage was arranged, and Pa was very pleased. But I felt all the time that no man on earth would ever take the place in my heart that had been given to my poor Frank. Still, if I had married Lord St. Simon, of course, I'd have done my duty by him. We can't command our love, but we can our actions. I went to the altar with him with the intention to make him just as good a wife as it was in me to be. You may imagine what I felt when, as I came to the altar rails, I glanced back and saw Frank standing looking at me out of the first pew. I thought it was his ghost at first, but when I looked again, there he still was, with a kind of question in his eyes, as if to ask me whether I was glad or sorry to see him. I wonder I didn't drop. I know that everything was turning around, and the words of the clergyman were like a buzz in the bee of my ear. I didn't know what to do. Should I stop the service and make a scene in the church?
I glanced at him again. He seemed to know what I was thinking, for he raised a finger to his lips to tell me to be still. Then I saw him scribble on a piece of paper, and I knew that he was writing me a note. As I passed his pew on the way out, I dropped my bouquet next to him, and he slipped me the note in my hand when he returned me the flowers. It was only a line asking me to join him when he made the sign for me to do so. Of course, I never doubted for the moment that my first duty was to him now, and I determined to do whatever he might direct. When I got back, I told my maid, who had known him in California, and had always been his friend, or I ordered her to say nothing, but to get a few things packed and my ashlar ready. I know I ought to have spoken to Lord St. Simon, but it was dreadful hard before his mother and all those other great people. I just made up my mind to run away and explain afterwards. I hadn't been at the table 10 minutes before I saw Frank out the window on the other side of the road. He beckoned to me, and I began walking to the park, slipped out my things, and followed him. Some woman came over talking something or other about Lord St. Simon to me, and it seemed to me that the little I had heard he had a little secret of his own before our marriage. But I managed to get away from her and soon overtook Frank. We got into a cab together and drove away from the lodgings he had taken in Gordon Square. And that was my true wedding after all those years of waiting. Frank had been a prisoner among the Apaches, had escaped and come to Frisco, found that I had given him up for dead, and gone to England. He followed me here, and had come upon me at last in the very morning of my second wedding.
I saw the paper, explained the American. It gave me the name of the church, but not where the lady lived.
Then we had to talk as we should do, and Frank was all for openness. But I was so ashamed of it all, and I felt that I should like to vanish and never be seen again from any of them. Just sending a line to my pa, perhaps, to show him that I was alive. It was awful to me to think of all the lords and ladies sitting at the breakfast table waiting for me to come back. So Frank took my wedding clothes and things and made a bundle of them, so that I should not be traced, and dropped them away somewhere where no one could find them. It was likely that we should have gone to the Pirates tomorrow, only that this good gentleman, Mr. Holmes, came round to us this evening, though how he found us is more than I can think. He showed up very clearly and kindly that I was wrong and that Frank was right, and that he should be putting ourselves in the wrong if we were so secret. Then he offered to give some chance of talking to Lord St. Simon alone, so he came right away to his room at once. Now, Robert, you have heard it all, and I'm very sorry I have given you any pain, and I hope that you do not think very meanly of me.
Lord St. Simon had by no means related his rigid attitude. He had listened with a furrowing brow and compressed lips for this long narrative. "Excuse me," he said, "but it is not my custom to discuss my most intimate personal affairs in this public manner."
Then you won't forgive me? You won't shake hands before I go?
"Oh, certainly, if it would give you any pleasure." He put out his hand and coldly grasped that which she extended to him. "I had hoped," suggested Holmes, "that you would have joined us for a friendly supper." "I think that there's little you ask a bit too much," responded his lordship. "I may be forced to acquiesce in these recent developments, but I can hardly be expected to make merry over them. I think that with your permission, I will now wish you all a very good night." He concluded us all in a sweeping bow and stalked out of the room. "Then I trust you will at least honor me with your company," said Sherlock Holmes. "It is always a joy to meet an American, Mr. Moulton, for I am one of those who believe that the folly of a monarch and the blundering of a minister in far-gone years will not prevent our children from being some day citizens of the same world-wide country under a flag which shall be quartering a Union Jack with the stars and stripes." That would be interesting. The case has been an interesting one, remarked Holmes, when our visitors left us, because it serves to show very clearly how simple an explanation may be in an affair which at first seems to be almost inexplicable. Nothing could be more natural than the sequence of events as narrated by this lady, and nothing stranger than the result when visited, for instance, by Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard. You were not yourself at fault, then. From the first, two facts were obvious to me. The one, the lady had been quite willing to undergo the wedding ceremony, and the other, that she had repented of it within a few minutes of returning home. Obviously, something had occurred during the morning, then, to cause her to change her mind. What could that something be? She could not have spoken to anyone when she was out, or when she had the company of a bridegroom. Had she seen someone, then? If she had, it must be someone from America, because she had spent so short a time in that country, that she could hardly have allowed anyone to acquire so deep an influence over her that the mere sight of him would induce her to change her mind so completely. You see, we have already arrived, by the decision of process of exclusion, at an idea that might have seen an American. Then who could this American be, and why should she possess so much influence over her? It might be a lover. It might be a husband. Her young womanhood had, I knew, been spent through rough scenes and strange conditions, so far as I had got before I had ever heard Lord St. Simon's narrative. When he told us of a man in the pew, of the change in the bride's manner, of so transparent a device of obtaining a note as the dropping of a bouquet, and her resort to her confidential maid, and of her significant allusion to claim-jumping, which in miners' parlance means taking possession of that which another person has prior claim to, the whole situation became absolutely clear. She had gone off with a man, and that man was either a lover or a husband, and chances being in favor of the latter. And how in the world did you find them? It might have been difficult, but friend Lestrade held the information in his hands in the value which he did not know himself. The initials were, of course, of the highest importance, but more valuable still was to know that it was within a week he had settled the bill of one of the most select hotels in London. How did you do so select? By the select prices. 8 shillings for a bed, 8 pence for a glass of sherry, pointed to one of the most expensive hotels. There are not many in London which charge at this rate. In a second one in which I visited Northumberland Avenue, I learned by an inspection of the book that a Francis H. Moulton, an American gentleman, had left only the day before, and on looking at the entries against him, I came upon varied items which I had seen in the duplicate bill. His letters were to be forwarded to 226 Gordon Square, so thither I travelled, and being fortunate enough to find the living couple at home, I ventured to give them some paternal advice, and to point them to which they would be better clear the way, when possible, rather than in general public, of Lord St. Simon in peculiar. I invited them to meet him here, and, as you see, I made him keep the appointment. But with no good result, I remarked. His conduct was certainly not very gracious. Ah, Watson, said Holmes, smiling, perhaps you would not be gracious either, if, after all the trouble of wooing and wedding, you found yourself deprived an instant of the bride and of the fortune. I think that we may judge Lord St. Simon very mercifully, and thank Carstairs that we are never likely to find ourselves in the same position. Now, draw up your chair and hand me my violin, for the only problem we still have is to solve how we will deal with these bleak autumn evenings.